I just had a shocking revelation. I've never talked about Rivens. So how about we fix that? In this Warframe guide, I'm gonna tell you everything you need to know about Riven mods, how their mechanics work, where to farm them for yourself, and most importantly, how you can use them to buff your damage output beyond belief. As always, big shoutouts to these lovely people here for covering the electricity bill, and now, let's jump right into it. Now, first things first, let's answer the most important question right off the bat. What even are Rivens? Well, that's actually pretty simple. Rivens are special mods in Warframe. They are purple and look very fancy. However, they are limited to weapons and weapons only. Now, so far so good, but what sets Rivens apart from normal weapon mods is that Rivens are only for one specific weapon at a time. Where, for example, Serration can be fit onto any rifle in the game, a Riven, for example, wouldn't be generated for rifles in general, but let's say for the Bratton in specific, and then it can only be used on the Bratton, or to be more precise, the Bratton weapon family. Let me explain. See, while it is pretty obvious that, let's say, a Bratton Riven would never be able to fit into a Burston, it would though fit onto a Bratton Prime or a Bratton Vandal, as those Brattons are part of the entire Bratton family, and of course, this not only extends to the Vandal and the Prime versions, all subvariants of a specific weapon are included in a Riven generated for said weapon. Now, there are also a couple counterexamples, so to keep it very darn short, if you have a Riven and you want to specifically know which subvariants you can use it on, just click on the Riven in your mod selection, and in the bottom right corner, you'll find a little icon that will list specifically which subvariants are eligible and which aren't. But yeah, we now know Rivens are mods for weapons, but only for a specific weapon family. However, that is not the only thing that makes them special. The next thing that makes them very unique compared to all the other types of mods in the game is that the stats on a Riven mod are completely random. You could, for example, have a Riven that gives you more damage and more crit chance, but also something with more reload speed and fire rate. It can really be anything on the Riven, only limitation being that a Riven will never have perks on it that make no sense with regards to the weapon that it is generated for. So, for example, for a Bratton Riven, you will never have something with melee combo count because a rifle cannot have melee combo. I think you get what I mean. Stats are random, but only those are used that could, in theory, apply to the weapon in the first place. Now, with regards to those stats, a Riven can either have 2 positive stats, 3 positive stats, 2 positive and 1 negative stat, or 3 positive and 1 negative stats. Also here, which one you get is random, however, usually those Riven loadouts where you have a negative stat are considered more favorably because having a negative stat means that the numbers on the positive stats will be generated higher as if it's just positive stats alone. So ideally, you want to have a Riven with a lot of good positive stats and then a somewhat irrelevant negative stat that wouldn't hurt you, something like negative zoom for example, because that then means that the positive stats get even stronger. And now that we're already speaking about how strong the numbers on the stats get, this is actually not 100% random. Instead, it does follow a rule called Riven Disposition. See, once you have a Riven for a weapon, you will have a new line in your weapon stats on the left side here called Riven Disposition, showcased by 5 points. The higher the Riven Disposition of a weapon is, the bigger the numbers for the individual Riven stats will end up being. So if you have a weapon with a 5 out of 5 Riven Disposition, you can expect some crazy buff values. However, on the flip side, if you only have a 1 out of 5, that means it can be that your buffs are so small, it might not even be worth using the Riven in the first place over something like a standard mod. Now, you might be wondering what determines this Riven Disposition, and that is also pretty simple. The higher the usage percentage of a certain weapon is compared to its peers, the lower the Riven Disposition will be. This was originally meant to be somewhat of a balancing mechanic to make off-meta weapons more viable, and these Riven Disposition stats are not frozen in time. In fact, they are constantly updated to remain representative of which weapons are played and which aren't. And yes, even if you already have a generated Riven, if the Riven disposition of that weapon changes, the numbers on your Riven will also change going forward. So you can never be 100% sure if a god roll Riven today will always be one. Also, in order to be able to equip a Riven in the first place, you have to be at least Mastery Rank 8. However, there are also Rivens out there that require a higher Mastery rank, up to a maximum of MR 16. And finally, you unfortunately can't own infinite amounts of Rivens. By default, every Warframe player can only have 15 Rivens in their inventory. However, you can buy 3 more Riven slots for 16 platinum each, up to a maximum of 180 Riven slots in total. Plus, when you're Master Rank 30, you get another 30 Riven slots for free, meaning 210 is the highest amount of Rivens any Warframe player can own at the moment. And now like the video to make sure your next Riven will have crit chance, crit damage, and negative impact. But alright, you now know everything about how exactly Rivens work, so the next thing you might be asking yourself is, well, where the heck do I even get Rivens in the first place? So let's talk about that next. If you want to farm Riven mods for yourself, there are a lot of different ways in 2025, so let's go over all of them. First of all, and this is usually the situation in which players encounter Rivens for the first time in their Warframe playthrough, would be after you finish the War Within story quest, you unlock a new game mode called Sortie. This is a series of 3 missions and you can do one of those sorties per day, and as a reward for sorties, you have a chance to obtain Rivens. By the way, doesn't only go for sorties, also in your weekly Archon hunt, you can get Rivens too. Just in case you're curious, this right here is the drop chance table for Rivens in the sortie, how likely it is to get a certain type of Riven out of it. But while playing your daily sortie is a great way to stock up on Rivens relatively fast, it is not the only thing you can do. Another great method would be to go to Paladino in the Iron Wake node here on Earth, talk to her, and then once per week you can buy Riven mods from her for 10 Riven slavers each, or as I like to call them, purple Archon shards ordered on Wish. Just note that in order to unlock this Iron Wake node in the first place, you have to finish the Chains of Harrow quest first. Another great way to get Rivens, albeit for a bit more higher level players, would be the weekly Steel Path circuit in Deviri, where you can get the Incarnon adapters for your weapons. In order to get access to this, you of course have to have Steel Path unlocked and finish the Deviri quest, but then instead of Incarnon adapters, you could also always go and just pick some Rivens as rewards for the circuit. And speaking of Steel Path, don't forget to also always check out what Teshin has up in his store, because here too you can purchase Rivens from Steel Essence. Next, go in your orbiter and check out the Nightwave console, because Riven are also a very popular reward for the higher Nightwave levels. Check out your weekly 1999 calendar, because also here Rivens can appear as a reward. And if you're looking for Rivens for companion weapons, like for Sentinels for example, then there is one place to go, and that would be Cephalon Samaris, where you can get a companion weapon Riven for 100,000 standing with him. Those Rivens, as far as I know, are not generated in all the other methods that I mentioned before. And if you don't like Samaris, you can also go into Deviri, talk to Akrithis, the vendor there, and buy a companion weapon Riven for 20 Pathos clamps. It's a pretty hefty price, but there is one specific gem among them, and that would be a Verglass Riven, because the Verglass is probably the best Sentinel weapon in the game. Has some great damage potential, however, the base crit chance is a little bit on the lower side, so that you can't mod it to over 50% by default, meaning with the Verglass you can't trigger Tenacious Bond. However, with a Verglass Riven that has a crit chance stat on it, you are able to get over 50%, enable the usage of Tenacious Bond. That is the reason why specifically Verglass Rivens are very sought after by the community. If you're up to do a little bit of grinding, then going for those companion weapon Rivens from Samaris or Akrithis can be very much worth it. But, as I initially said, Rivens are also generated for Arc Guns, but also here you can't get Arc Gun Rivens the normal way. Instead, there's one specific place to get them, and that would be go to a relay of your choice, walk over to the room of the Arbiters of Hexus and talk to this guy right here, the guy where you can buy the rewards for arbitration stuff, and this dude then will sell you Archon Rivens for Vitus Essence. These are the main ways to obtain all types of Rivens. There are a couple other more niche methods, like the occasional alert and something, but I don't think they're all that relevant, so in order to not stretch the video out too long, I don't really want to go over them right now. You can read it up in the wiki if you really want to. So, now you got your first Riven. What's next? See, Rivens don't work like normal mods, and just obtaining a Riven in the first place is only the first step. When you first take a look at a Riven, the only thing it really shows is for which weapon class it will end up being. It doesn't yet say which specific weapon, and it also doesn't have any stats on it yet. What you need to do to unveil this Riven, meaning to uncover its stats, is go to your arsenal and equip this veiled Riven onto any weapon of that specific weapon class that it says. Once you do that, the text on the Riven will change and it will display a certain challenge that you will have to overcome while having this Riven mod equipped in order to finally unveil it. Now, there are a whole lot of different challenges in the game. You can see them in the background right here. This is a list from the Warframe wiki. I'm gonna put you the link in the description down below in case you want to read through all of it. But what it comes down to here is that most Riven challenges are really darn simple. You know, stuff like get X amount of headshots or take out Y amount of enemies. Really no rocket science. However, there are two specific Riven challenges that can be very, very painful. The first one is to do a defense mission level 30 or higher without the defense target taking any damage. This means even if only the shield of the defense target gets scratched, the Riven challenge is instantly failed. This can be pretty tough, so my personal recommendation would be to make it easier, do not play a defense mission with ranged enemies because shots can hit the target from the other side of the room. Rather, go to Ares, there is an infested defense mission there, because infested enemies are usually melee and they're much easier to keep track of. As a Warframe, I would recommend Limbo or maybe Frost to protect the defense target. And if you can, just play it with a couple more players in the squad. The more helping hands you have, the easier it'll be to slog through it. And the second super annoying challenge is when you have to do an extermination mission without being detected. This one can be pretty darn impossible if you do it solo, especially if you're an early game player. However, if you have access to an invisible Warframe, it's of course a no-brainer, but even if you don't, just play the mission in multiplayer and let your team finish the exterminate mission because only you are not allowed to be seen. If enemies spot your team, that's absolutely no problem, so it is a viable choice to just hide in a corner at the beginning of the level and let your team take care of the rest. This will make the challenge much easier. Now, as I said, the rest of the challenges are pretty darn simple, shouldn't be all too much of a problem. Link to the list is in the description, and once you successfully complete the challenge, it will show that on your screen. You don't even have to finish the mission anymore, you can just abort the mission and go back to your ship. The Riven will be unveiled afterwards, showing all the stats and also showing which weapon it is made for. And another final little detail, in case you really can't be bothered to do that darn Riven challenge, there's one way around it, and that's an item called Veiled Riven Cipher. You can use this on any veiled Riven to instantly unveil it without having to do the challenge. You can buy one of them per week from Teshin for Steel Essence, or you can buy them for 20 platinum a piece in the market. That can get pretty expensive if you have a lot of Rivens, so my recommendation here would be just keep them in the inventory for that eventual Riven that's going to happen with the most toxic challenge you can imagine. Oh yeah, and of course, if you want to have a specific Riven for a specific weapon, you can always just buy Rivens from other players, just like you can trade any other mod in the game. Just keep in mind, good Rivens for popular weapons can get really darn expensive. Be aware, you can leave a lot of platinum on the table for a good one. But alright, you now know how Rivens work, how to farm them, you got your first own Riven, completed the challenge, obtained it, and it is complete garbage. What are you gonna do about it? Well, let's talk about that topic next, because there is a way that you can change these stats. See, once you have a Riven, what you can do is go to your mod selection right here, click on the Riven, and then there is a button that allows you to re-roll the Riven. This will bring you to a new window where you can pay a resource called Kuva to re-roll the stats on the Riven, meaning you will get an entirely new set of random stats. Only exception here is the weapon for which the Riven was generated cannot be changed any longer. This is set in stone. The stats up here though can be re-rolled as often as you like. Once you press the reroll button, the game will show you the new stats as well as the old ones, and then you can pick whether you want to keep the old version of the Riven or whether you want to switch over to the new one. This rerolling cycle can be repeated as often as you like, however keep in mind that the Kuva cost per reroll gradually increases up to a maximum of 3,500, so if you get unlucky, you can end up spending hundreds of thousands of Kuva until you finally get some acceptable stats. And now that we're already talking about rerolling, let's also go over Kuva for a minute, the resource that you need to reroll Rivens, and let's see where you can farm that. Now, first of all, just like with Rivens, there are a ton of different ways that you can farm Kuva, and I'm not going to mention every single one, but also here with the link in the description down below, you can find the entire list in the Warframe wiki, so let me now only go over the most relevant ones. First off, Kuva here and there appears as reward for certain Nightwave levels. You can also buy 10,000 Kuva per 50 Nightwave credits in the Nightwave credit shop. You can go to the Arbiters of Hexes, spending 25 Vitus Essence for 10,000 Kuva. You can get 10,000 for 15 Steel Essence from Teshin, however, this can only be done 25 times per week. Plus, there's another Teshin offer where you can get 50,000 for 55 Steel Essence. This is only available once every 8 weeks. Then you can go to the Zeraminten Zero and get 35,000 for 5 Avoid Plume Pinions from Archimedean Yonta. If you have them anyway, then you might as well turn them into Kuva. And one of my favorite methods, again, go to Paladino in Iron Wake, who will not only give you Rivens for Riven Slivers, but you can also buy 35,000 Kuva for 10 Riven Slivers, given the fact that Riven Slivers are relatively common because Eximus units drop them a lot. This is a farm that you should definitely do every week. Then a Krithis in Deviri might have 5,000 Kuva in the shop for 10 Pathos Clams, which you should definitely not do because that is much too high of a price. You can get Kuva from the 1999 calendar here and there, as well as from Flair in the Helvania Mall in exchange for beating heartstrings. And finally, Kuva also appears in the reward path for the Steel Path circuit. However, these various vendors are actually not the only source of Rivens in Warframe. You can also just farm them organically in Mission. However, I'm not gonna tell you about that right here because there is already an older video on my channel where I went over this very topic in much more detail. But don't leave now, I have one final very important tip for you. That is, given the fact that you only have a limited amount of Riven space, what are you going to do with the Rivens that you really don't need anymore? Well, first of all, Riven Mods are transmutable, so you can select 4 Rivens and transmute them into one random new Riven. One thing to note here is, if all 4 Rivens that you select for transmutation are for the same weapon class, so let's say you have 4 rifle-type Rivens that you transmute, then you're guaranteed that the resulting Riven will also again be a rifle Riven. Just important to mention here, in order to be able to transmute Rivens in the first place, you will need an item called Riven Transmuter, which you can either get whenever you take down the Hydralist, the 3rd Eidolon in the Plains of Eidolon, or you could also go to Lloyd in the Sanctum Anatomica and buy one in exchange for Vessel Capillaries. However, you can also dissolve Rivens into Endo. This can actually be very profitable because the more rerolls a Riven has, aka the more Kuva you invested into it, the more Endo you will get out of it once you dissolve it. And then finally, of course, you can always go and sell Rivens to other players for Platinum, either if you have a good one for a lot of Platinum, but also junk Rivens usually find a buyer. Just note that I personally don't have a lot of experience on the Riven market, so there's no real sales advice that I could give here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nost Linux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Ondakaneo 2, Skylar Bowser, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Murasaki, Shadow Lockhart, Trolloloxen, Antares, Patrosator, Boomia1, Mr. Games Plays, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.